if you are doing things through tax that reduce the overall tax revenue, there is nothing progressive or supportive of social justice about that. And those who argue for it have to reckon with that argument.
Well, I read your wealth tax article last night, and I was like, huh? I didn't expect this. I think it'll actually crush the middle class more because they'll have to the Treasury will have to find the money elsewhere.
There's two ways you can make the argument you've just made, right? One of them is it's wrong because we need rich people because that's how you create wealth, that's how you grow the economy and so on. So that's sort of like an aggregate argument, which I think is true. And one of the general things I think has happened in politics is that politicians have gotten away with not standing up for choices that are trade-offs. They pretend things are win-wins and that, there's no sort of difficult choices and we'll get jobs and security and growth and all, whatever else. And actually with something like that, you might still say, no, but anyway, even though we're going to lose more revenue than we're going to generate, we want to do it because it's morally right. But you've got to reckon with that argument that you are then going to lose tax revenue that you could be spending on public services, education, building roads in my constituency, etc. And I was not convinced that that argument was being made clearly and forcefully enough.
It's hard to get people from the left on the show, people from the Labour Party. But interestingly, I was just listening to Gavin Newsom's interview with Sean Ryan, and I thought, this is great. It's two people who are politically different talking about their differences.
Yeah.
And actually, I really like Gavin Newsom because he admitted his mistakes. And I think we haven't got there fully yet in the UK where politicians realise that actually the imperfections are things people like. It allows us to have imperfections.
Yeah.
But I'd love to interview Angela Rayner. I disagree with her on so many things, but I've walked a different pair of shoes than her. So I want to know hers and where she comes from. And then I want her to know some of the decisions that Labour have made, how they've affected my business. I think it'd just be a good conversation, but I'm glad you're here.
Well, I will ask her. I won't start with we disagree on most things. I'll start with the latter bit, but I will definitely happily ask her. And there's lots of, there's a generation now of newly elected Labour MPs whose views I think your readers might be surprised by.
Well, I read your wealth tax article last night, and I was like, huh? I didn't expect this. I mean, again, it's something I disagree with. Not ideologically, more from just an economic background. I think we've lost 26,000 millionaires in the last 2 years, and
right.
Every rich person I know is leaving or planning to leave, and I just know more will leave. I just don't think. I think it'll actually crush the middle class more because they'll have to the Treasury will have to find the money elsewhere.
Right.
But your opinion, you're against it.
Well, that was, and in a way, there's two ways you can make the argument you've just made, right? One of them is it's wrong because we need rich people because that's how you create wealth, that's how you grow the economy and so on. So that's sort of like an aggregate argument, which I think is true. But the other argument is, and this is what I think is so often missed on our side, what is the Labour Party for? The sort of 90s version of it was kind of economic efficiency plus social justice. How does the social justice happen? Through tax revenue and redistribution through the state. If you are doing things through tax that reduce the overall tax revenue, there is nothing progressive or supportive of social justice about that. And those who argue for it have to reckon with that argument. And I feel a little bit like one of the general things I think has happened in politics is that politicians have gotten away with not standing up for choices that are trade-offs. They pretend things are win-wins and that, there's no sort of difficult choices and we'll get jobs and security and growth and all, whatever else. And actually with something like that, you might still say, no, but anyway, even though we're going to lose more revenue than we're going to generate, we want to do it because it's morally right. But you've got to reckon with that argument that you are then going to lose tax revenue that you could be spending on public services, education, building roads in my constituency, etc. And I was not convinced that that argument was being made clearly and forcefully enough.
Why did you become a politician?
I think we live in very dangerous and insecure and uncertain times. Yeah. I think the global order is quite rapidly at the moment breaking up and changing and, remorphing. I think the basic composition of Western democracies are also changing. And I think these are massive questions that require serious leadership to engage with. And when I went and did my PhD at Harvard, I met tons of people from McKinsey, from a couple from Goldman Sachs, from all these big, institutions. And I was fiercely jealous of their wealth and their, jet-setting lifestyle. One of them had never flown economy class. I remember meeting this guy and I was like, what? I've never flown anything other than economy class. But to me, they were all like missing the obvious point that in an age of this kind of massive and profound change, politics is the thing that matters. Mm-hmm. It's not finance. It's not, and all of these are important industries, but you don't shape history. You don't shape the trajectory of your country and the people who live in it through finance, in my view. You shape it through politics, and people like me in that place just weren't going into politics. And that seemed wrong. I was very lucky because my dad grew up in a working class area in Bury in the north.
What did he do for work?
He did all manner of small jobs in fact, he was telling me the other day he worked in Burnley Market age 15, 16. Burnley, yeah.
My dad's from Blackburn.
Oh, really?
Well, it's actually Accrington.
Oh, yeah,
He'll spit when he hears Burnley.
Oh, you should get Alistair Campbell on. Yeah, no, I thought you might say that.
I mean, one, he won't. He definitely won't. I give him a hard time, and I really respect the man.
Well, you have that to bond over at least.
Yeah, I think Rory Stewart gave him too easy a time over Iraq, and I don't think he wants to talk about that anymore. And that's all that someone like me wants to talk about. But yeah, so anyway, you're talking about your dad.
Yeah, so dad came from there, and then he eventually set up he trained as a solicitor, went to a grammar school, trained as a solicitor, and then he set up a legal recruitment business.
Okay.
And he's a real entrepreneur, my dad. So he grew up with very little, set up a business. He grew it from nothing to a global firm operating in, I don't know how many cities all over the world. Wow. And then sold it just before the crisis, 2007. Not
good timing.
Yeah. He would say it was not judgment, but it was a bit of judgment.
But you yourself, therefore, have turned. You could have gone and earned a good 6-figure salary, good bonuses, London lifestyle maybe, but good couple of holidays. Like you could have gone and done that life easily, and it's a good life. And you've turned it down to get shouted out of Twitter for people to give you a very hard time in what appears to be a really, really tough job. I'm reading that Ian Dunt's book, Why Westminster, Westminster works and why it doesn't.
It's on my summer list.
It just seems a very hard job.
It's exhausting. It's more than anything else. It's emotionally exhausting because to do a good job of it, I have to. So on Friday, I'll be going up for one of my monthly coffee mornings. I write a letter to about 2,500 people and say, come and have a brew with me, just have a chat. There's no agenda. Get to know me. And the theory behind it is that we've lost face-to-face contact and conversation and getting to know each other. And quite often what happens at these things is round a table, there'll be two people who live on the same street, but they never talked about migration or, tax to each other, let alone to me. And that's a beautiful thing. That is the essence of how democracy should work. But a lot of my time at those things is, one, hearing about people having unbelievably tough situations, and two, they're angry. They're angry at me. They're angry that their lives have not been getting better for a long time. And when they list the reasons why, I'm like, I would be spitting if I were in your shoes. And to do a good job of that, I can't close it off. I can't sort of put up a wall, because then you become one of these robot politicians that the public just think are robots. But you also can't just fully let it wash over you. Otherwise you lie. I mean, this has happened to me a few times. You lie in bed in the night thinking about the conversations you've just had that day, and it can be completely overwhelming. So you have to hold the capacity to feel the things that people want you to feel and that they feel, while not letting it overwhelm, my own love for my kids or my marriage or whatever, because then you go mad.
Are you able to be as effective as you want? And it's a loaded question in that I've considered the political route. I'm from Bedford. We've got our issues. We've got issues on the high street. We've got our cost of living crisis issues. I own businesses locally. I'm seeing it. I've considered running for mayor because we have a lot of autonomy, but I've spent time with the mayor, and the council just has no money. And the reason it doesn't have a lot of money is the amount of things they're mandated to do from central government. I've considered becoming an MP, but I worry that I would travel to London weekly and not be able to affect change. And the other thing I really worry about, and something I would push on, is how free am I to how freely can I speak? Because I was even surprised about your article with regarding the wealth tax, but the more I learn about the whip, I would worry that I wouldn't be free enough to say the things I want to say.
Yeah. And it's a perennial tension. I mean, there's two things there. One is, can you affect change? Answer, and we should, it might be of interest to talk about why, but frustratingly, so often the answer to that is no. You cannot do the things that the people who vote for you expect you to be able to do. And that is a broken part of our system. And until we fix it, nothing else good is going to happen in this country, in my opinion. And then, are you allowed to say what you want to say? Again, the answer for a long time has been no, but I think that's changing a little bit. It used to be the case. So discipline is important. Politics is a team sport.
Yep.
Someone's in charge. And if you disagree with them, you either resign and then explain why publicly, or you keep stum. That is an important part of politics. But it used to be the case that the way people communicated was through, the Today programme and BBC Breakfast and ITV Breakfast and whatever. And you did that round in the morning and you probably spoke to, 14, 15 million people, and basically a message was out there. That pulpit doesn't exist anymore. If you do a good job on the Today programme and you don't mess up and you have this dance about, whether you're talking nonsense or not, and if you're allowed to swear on this.
You say what the fuck you want.
Okay, there you go. There's the answer. You have this stupid dance between, the interviewer and the politician. If the politician does a good job and doesn't mess up, no one will know about it. No one will know about what they've said, really. So we have got to that's part of the reason why I'm here. I think the beautiful thing about the age of media we now live in is I can talk to people across different political divides. I can learn from doing that. I can listen, can grow my own and develop my own politics, as well as, explaining what might be unexpected about mine. And that's going to require much more freedom. I'm on the government payroll. If I disagree with the Prime Minister, I've got to resign. But I'm here having this conversation because if we can't talk about why the state's broken, what's wrong with our democracy and constitution and all the rest of it, then, you really can't fix some of these big things that are broken in our politics.
Well, these types of conversations are becoming more important because I'm just a normal bloke from Bedford. Just a typical normal guy from Bedford who likes football, wants to have a drink with his mates on the weekend. And I get to say that, I'm not particularly intelligent, but I get to put across the points I have and for you to reply. And we can sit here for an hour, 2 hours and just chat away. It's unedited. And there's an appreciation for those kind of conversations. I've given up on the BBC and Sky News. It's 2 to 3 minutes sometimes at best, and you don't get to know the person. And I want to know Josh. I want to know Mike Tapp. I want to know Angela Rayner. I want to know Nigel. I want to know these people. And so you get it from that. But you'll know from being at Harvard, there's an importance about precision in language.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will know this. I'm not teaching you anything you don't know. But often I find the opposite is true with politicians. Sometimes they won't answer the question. And I know, look, we all see the game that's being played. We all understand why that lack of precision exists. But it just chips away at that trust.
Totally agree.
Just chips and chips and chips away at the trust. And so then I sit here and go, well, what are the areas I can actually then get into with Josh? Because there's no point me probing you on something that Rachel's done or that Starmer's done that even if you disagree, you can't say because of the importance of loyalty in the party. I understand. So we should talk about the things you can talk about, the things that are important. And then I at least get to know you. But you don't seem like a normal Labour politician, by the way.
Well, I'm not sure whether that's an insult or a compliment. I think it's probably a compliment, at least from you. But
no, I think it is because you want variety in a party.
I think it's vital. I mean, I know you're talking to Katie Lamb later, who she and I were in a debate in Parliament about whether or not you can rescind UK citizenship from people who have, for whatever reason, committed a serious crime and then have dual citizenship. So they have citizenship in another country. And we, the government, were changing the law on that. I spoke in support of the bill and made an argument about what citizenship is. And there are a couple of people on my benches, on her backbenches, actually, Conservative backbenches, and then on the Lib Dem and Greens, who basically said, Parliament shouldn't do this. The court's already spoken, and the court's disagreeing. What the court said is different to what the government is now legislating for. And so the government's just overruling the Supreme Court. And I remember I said in my speech, That is exactly how our democracy is supposed to work. We do not have a federal US Supreme Court that can strike down legislation. It's a really powerful thing about our democracy that Parliament basically can do mostly what it wants. And that's a good thing. And there are some ways in which we should make that more so, I think. And then she stood up and made a speech that was almost exactly the same. And I thought, that's interesting. We're both newly elected people. We both think that lots of things are broken and we need to fix them in this country. And we both think that one of the great strengths we have as a country in doing that is the sovereignty of Parliament. And then there were older generation politicians, backbenchers on both sides, saying, oh, you can't overwrite the courts. You know, that's a bad thing to do. This is scandalous from the government, blah, 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 blah. And we were both like, that is literally how British democracy is meant to work.
Well, the idea that you and Katie Lamb would be talking to each other and discussing ideas and debating and maybe agreeing, I think is a great thing. That's what you want to hear. PMQs can be funny, but at times you just want Kemi to stand up and go, do you know what? You've done a good job there. Yeah. We commend you. And vice versa. Because then you feel like, and look, and I know there needs to be a tension in politics. I understand it. But at the same time, when all you see is people disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing because they want to win the next election, it just comes, I think that's maybe why there's become, this apathy with politics now. Nobody trusts anything anymore. And the fact I love that. I think that's incredible. But you are there is this newer generation coming through, which feels different from the newer generation of student politicians.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, I think part of it is, I don't know how old you are. I'm not going to ask. It's rude.
I'm older than you.
Older than
46.
me. 46. Yeah. So I have grown up in a world basically that I remember 9/11.
Yep.
I remember the Iraq War. I remember the 2008 financial crisis. I remember the pandemic. I remember austerity. I remember the pandemic. Blah, 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 blah. It's basically just a succession of crises. That's pretty much my life growing up.
And it probably is that for anyone, though.
Well, if you chat to, I was listening to reading a piece by Susan Glasser from the New Yorker, and I think she's a brilliant journalist. And she had this fascinating bit at the end where she basically admitted that for her, 1989, fall of the Berlin Wall, was the best year in her life. But it had led her, it sort of seduced her into believing that period after the end of the Cold War until, sort of 2010s, mid-2010s in Britain was normal, and it was abnormal because the post-war period was an unusual period of stability, of American hegemony, of, a global order that wasn't really changing, financial systems that sort of broadly worked. Even when they had big crises, they seemed to sort of survive. That was not normal. And for me, it's pretty obvious that wasn't normal and that the world has been sort of sliding towards various military, financial, and economic crises of a whole range of different kinds. And I think that makes politicians who've grown up in that world much more we've got much higher risk appetites. I mean, sometimes I think politicians a little bit above can be a bit frightened sometimes, and I don't know what they're frightened of.
Cancellation, losing their seat, which could mean losing their income, maybe losing their career progression. They've got eyes on a front bench, maybe higher, want to play it safe, fear the backlash. I think there's a lot of different incentives at play. This is why I find Rupert Lowe so interesting, in that I actually don't agree with him on everything. But he's made his money. He doesn't need his income, and he just stands for what he thinks. And I always find that kind of interesting when somebody can speak freely. Like with this, we can speak freely. We don't have to worry about our sponsors. We don't have to worry about Ofcom. So we can speak freely. And I think a free society needs people to be able to speak freely. And I think we've lost that in this country quite a bit. There is a chilling effect. I think the Lucy Connolly situation has really not helped. And I disagree with what she tweeted, but I don't think she should be in jail. And once you lose free speech, you lose a lot with it. And politicians who can just speak a bit more freely, I think, will be good for the country. But I feel like there's been crises my whole life. I mean, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, which were amazing 2 decades. But I remember the first Iraq War. I remember the Balkans. I remember Hillsborough. I remember just crisis after crisis. I think technology has changed a lot. The 24-hour news cycle, now the instant Twitter news cycle.
I mean, I think for what it's worth, well, 2 quick things. One is I threw my phone at Rupert Lowe once. He probably didn't mention it, but
you actually threw your phone at him?
Yeah, he was at the bottom of the stairs in a little huddle after he'd resigned, and I was coming down the stairs, didn't see him, and I dropped my phone down the stairs. It went down the sort of spiral staircase in Parliament. It went landed.
Dropped is different from thrown.
No, I know. He said, "Why did you throw your?" He was joking, and then I said hello. He probably wouldn't remember that, and he might do though. It did whack. It's not often you get a thrown phone at his head. Anyway, he's twice now in Parliament seen me and say, "You're the one who threw a phone at my head." But I think that's true. But I do think there is an important difference, which is that take the Balkans as an example.
Yeah.
That was an example of how the world order worked at that point. We intervened. There was a, right to intervene, responsibility to intervene, RTI as they called it. There was a clear global power that was a backstop to that intervention and underscored that there needed to be a resolution to this conflict because otherwise the US would, be there physically. And even in Hillsborough as well, that was a sort of social crisis in a way, or a kind of crisis of our institutions. And it was corruption and it was all kinds of things. But the difference is that now in Ukraine, for example, in the Middle East right now, there just is no, Pax Americana. There is no ultimate backstop that says you need to sort this out, otherwise I will be there and I will sort it out. And that means that there's no obvious resolution to any of these conflicts. They could go on for years because no one's going to make them stop. And I think that's a very different world to the one of the 90s and 2000s.
Well, we also have a world where 8 billion people can have a voice and an opinion, and you can grow from relative obscurity to somebody people listen to very quickly.
Totally.
And you can do it based on telling the truth and telling lies. I think in the days where there was 6 p.m. news, which my dad would watch, and there was a newspaper that came once a day, we were kind of guided into what we would believe, but trusted, even if we disagreed with a bunch of politicians to deal with it. Now we have such a fragmented narrative, fragmented media space. It's very difficult to know what to believe in any situation.
Totally agree with that.
Every single topic has multiple nuanced narratives that go into it. And it's really, really hard. Ukraine and Russia is a great example. I'm of the firm belief that Putin is a dictator who illegally invaded Ukraine and is destroying the lives of people there. But there is a strong conservative opinion that the US meddled in Ukrainian politics and he is just trying to protect Russians on the border. And it's like, you can actually always see both arguments.
I didn't even really know that. That's fascinating. I didn't even really know that.
But you can always you can see both arguments. Yeah. And if someone you ideologically trust is presenting one argument, then maybe you start to believe it. And you repeat that. It was similar. This guy's got this podcast, Martin Made, who came out and said that Churchill was the real villain of World War II. And that became a new narrative. And so it becomes very difficult to know what the truth is. And I struggle with it myself. Yeah, I would say I've gone from centre right to a lot more right recently. And I don't know, is that just the circles I mix in? Is it just the opinions I've heard? Or is it based on fact? It's really hard to navigate. So for you as a politician, it must be really difficult.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that so much. And I think, there's lots of things that follow from it. One is that it is hard as a politician because when you do a good thing and to go real hyperlocal for a second,
Makerfield is your...
Makerfield, yeah, which is just sort of south of Wigan South, effectively. It's a set of 4 or 5 towns just south of Wigan, most of which were pit mine towns.
Okay.
If I do something good that I'm proud of, get something cleared up, or I get funding for a health centre, to tell people that I've done that, and the result of the work that I did in order to get that result is really hard. There's a bunch of different fragmented community groups. There's different platforms that the 16 and the 24-year-olds are on from the 60 and the 74-year-olds. And it means for the government, even when it does do a straightforwardly good thing, it's really difficult to get out there. It goes back to that. You do the morning round in 1998, BBC, ITV, etc., and you would basically get your message out to the country. Not true anymore. And I think that the thing that I worry even more about that, which I think everybody, doesn't matter what your politics are, is a nation, a country, needs a collective story. That's what it is, in a way. And in order to have that kind of collective story, you've got to have shared memories, shared feelings at given moments in history. You've got to have a kind of story about what you're doing, where you're going, where you came from, and who you are. And that requires some shared platforms to tell the story on. And I think that we really lack that at the moment. I don't know where that is happening.
Yeah, and also we need it's shared wins. I didn't vote for Tony Blair, but I could feel the positivity of the nation at the time. I could feel New Labour. I could feel what was happening with football in the Premier League. I could feel what's happening with Oasis. It was a brilliant time, even though I would never have voted for Labour. It was a genuinely brilliant time in the country. And at the moment, the thing that I feel most sorry for Labour for, which people might be in the comments now getting angry.
Nice you to say
that. But as a Conservative who didn't vote for the last time I voted Conservative probably was Cameron. I just don't vote anymore.
I was going to say, did you vote Reform or did you not vote?
So for my first election, I voted at 18. I voted Conservative because my dad did. My dad...
Was he an entrepreneur?
No, he's from Lancashire. Well, he's an Irish immigrant.
Oh, okay.
His dad moved to England when he was 9, when my dad was 9, and worked on the trains. And my dad ended up becoming an aircraft engineer. So did very well. Well, I worked hard. Mum was a nurse. So working class to middle class. He gave us a good upbringing. But my dad was always a Conservative. He looks like his life looks like that of a Labour voter, working class northern guy. But actually was a Conservative voter because he just one simple rule: I will vote for whoever taxes me the least.
Yeah.
And so when I first voted, I was still in school. So whatever's best for my dad's best for me. I didn't know what I was doing. So I voted Conservative. I followed on voting Conservative, and then I just stopped voting because the Conservative Party stopped being what I thought a Conservative Party was. And I think the last 14 years, they were beyond disastrous. This my one bit of sympathy for the Labour Party is that they've been handed a turd. They're, not only were the economic decisions terrible, they actually destroyed the trust in government by what they did through COVID. And so it was a really unfair position. Any criticism I have for Labour will be on their policies since. But they've just been put in a very difficult position, and I accept that. I actually think it's a really bad time for a Labour Party to come into power.
Yeah.
You want a Labour Party to come into power, at a time where there's been strong growth, hopefully a surplus, and have a chance to kind of rebalance the books. I accept the redistribution ideas of Labour. I don't agree with them, but I accept them, and I think it's useful if it comes at a time of relative prosperity. I think we're at a time where we need deregulation, lower taxes, the kind of things that an Austrian economist would say would drive growth, and that just can't work for a Labour Party. And so it's a really challenging time.
Did you read Rachel Reeves's speech yesterday, which was...
I haven't read it, but I've seen the headlines, which is good because the people I know in the financial sector said this is long overdue. I would like to have seen her talk about Bitcoin because I'm a big supporter of Bitcoin. I think that is a technology and a monetary system we should all pay much closer attention to. I don't know if you have at all.
Yeah, well, that's a whole long conversation. Distributed ledger technologies, I'm very in favour of. I think some of the currency implications of them, the coin implications of them, I worked on them for a bit. This is way back early stages when I was doing my PhD in tech. But I'm completely unconvinced about some of the commercial applications of them so far. I think there's much more interesting things we could be doing with them.
I could simplify it for you. If it's not Bitcoin, it's a shitcoin. So Bitcoin to me is almost entirely the only one I care about. My caveat is Tether, which is a stable coin, is very useful.
No, I agree with all this. It's not that there are other coins that I prefer. It's that currency, you can use distributed ledger technologies to verify, to build, all this stuff that aren't about currencies. Mm-hmm. And I think they are much more interesting applications. But at the moment, there's no commercial incentive to build them at the same speed. And I would be massive, if I were the state and I were thinking about that technology and how you apply it, what I would be doing is letting the currency, Bitcoin do its thing, because it looks like it's doing well and it's doing better than others and all the rest of it, which is good. But actually putting money into, well, how could we use it to verify all kinds of other bits of shared identities, to bake trust into different systems, all this stuff.
Yeah, the only area. So, if I was a government, and I spoke to Zero about this, because Reform actually have their crypto bill, which I don't 100% agree with. But what I would do is I would just remove most of the regulations around ETFs. I know we've got ETNs come in, but I would I would just allow access to it, because it's really interesting. When people make the argument for Bitcoin as anti-inflationary, if you actually track the price of Bitcoin, it pretty much tracks the increase in the M2 money supply. And so for me, both for my businesses and personally, it's been a very good defense against inflation. But I lost 3 bank accounts because of Bitcoin, because of the regulation. So I removed a bunch of the regulation. The government actually holds, I think the Treasury holds, correct me if I'm wrong here, so the Treasury holds it, but holds a large amount of Bitcoins, tens of thousands. I would put that into a strategic reserve and never sell it, because that is like rebuilding our gold reserves. But the other thing I would do is I would encourage the miners. I don't know if you know much about the miners, but I would encourage the miners to move here, because what's happened in Texas, the Bitcoin miners become the buyer of last resort for energy. And so where you've got curtailment of 1 to 1.5 billion of energy a year from the wind farms, the miners would just buy this and use it. And it's direct money to the energy companies, reducing the costs of our energy. I'm a big supporter. So that was the only thing on Rachel. I was like, I wish you'd have mentioned that. But there's apart from Steve Baker and I think and obviously Reform now, there's been this aversion to Bitcoin, which I think is a real shame, because every single person I know has protected themselves with it quite well.
And I'm not remotely averse to it. In fact, I think politicians should spend way more time engaging, not just with Bitcoin, but with the underlying technologies as well. And I think that's true of AI as well. I mean, to your point about Rachel,
I really want to talk to you about AI, by the way.
We could definitely talk about that.
It was my first point.
It's I just think it's interesting that, like, your point about it being a difficult time for a Labour government. Yeah. Obviously that's true, but I can't be arsed with whinging, it's a tough time, blah, blah, blah. It is, of course, a tough time, and it is a doubly tough time for a set of politicians who mostly care about social justice and equality and so on to come in and do things like deregulate the financial sector. But to me, that's also a big opportunity, because Labour can demonstrate and needs to demonstrate that it can do the tough turning things around. Geopolitics are very difficult. Europe's at war. The financial situation is dire. And that is something we should be grateful to have as an opportunity in a sort of strange way. It's a really difficult thing that the government is navigating, because we've actually spent a long time talking about the 14 years. As you know, if it comes up in Prime Minister's question, everyone goes,
22 billion black hole.
22 billion black hole. I worry slightly that my colleagues have recoiled from that a bit because of the backlash against it, and they really shouldn't, because the inheritance is shocking. And every time I understand more about it, the more I think that. But the problem, the constraint on it is, my colleagues should not worry about the backlash from the Telegraph on the 22 billion. Of course, they're going to try and say it wasn't there. The public are in a moment where they're sick of politicians saying, I have no choice, or my hands are tied, or, an economist told me that I had to do this, or a lawyer told me that I had to do this, otherwise I would end up in Strasbourg. They want politicians to own their own power, to make choices and to argue for them. And it's really difficult tension to explain honestly to the public how bad the British state is, what kind of state it's in, and how much of that is the fault of a complete disinterest in governing seriously over the last particularly 10 years from the Conservative Party, while simultaneously not saying we're only doing this because of them, because public are not up for that. They're not interested in that. Sounds like game playing. They're tired of that kind of thing. And what they want is a forward-looking, principled plan to fix things and to make arguments about them. And holding that tension between honestly and confidently explaining how bad it is and how much it is their fault and how little they've cared about this country and governing it, while simultaneously being confident enough to explain what we're doing and why because of our own principles, not because our hands are tied because lawyers told us what to do. That is basically the tension at the heart of what's happened in a lot of cases, I think, over this first year. And I remember when the winter fuel payments decision happened, my first reaction to it was, there's a really clear principled argument to make here. Mm-hmm. We've got to make it, because if we don't make it, we're just going to be telling voters that the first major economic decision we made is one that was just necessity. We just had to do it. We had no choice. And of course, it's never true in politics. You've always got a choice. And so we had to explain what those principles were and articulate them and defend them and be confident about them, or we shouldn't do it.
But it's funny. It's funny because it's helping reform. In that, when the Labour Party blame the Conservatives for 14 years or 10 years, personally, I go back further. I think these problems have been 2 to 3 decades in the making. Mm-hmm. But I think everyone knows the Conservatives made mistakes. And the movement to reform has been a rejection of essentially the uniparty, the two-party system now, just somebody offering something different. And so Reform are now in this really easy position where they get to criticize both parties. They get to be the outlet. And that's why almost it feels like every by-election, every local council election, they are clean sweeping. And I think that's a tough position for Labour, because for the things that Labour needs to do to convince those reform voters to become Labour voters, they have to look nothing like a Labour Party. They have to really drive growth. And I mean, you're in what's the group you're in? The pro-growth group.
Yeah, I set up the Labour growth group.
Yeah. Explain that to me, because I'm very interested to just kind of like probe that.
Well, I'm part of 2 groups. One of them I set up and another one I'm heavily involved with, both of which are pushing Labour and the government in directions that might be unexpected and counterintuitive, but I actually think are going back to what Labour is for, which is about representing the interests and the values of working class people in this country. And I think Labour has drifted from that in recent years, and we need to that's what it's about and should be about. So on the growth side of it, I set up this group because it was pretty obvious to me, and it's become even more obvious over the last year of actually governing. And we set it up pretty early on. It was in autumn. I was in the back of the car with my staffer over here. And there were 4 of us sitting in there, and we were going through spreadsheets, frantically ringing people saying, will you join this group? Because we're going to launch on Monday. And it was a lot of fun setting it up, and it got people energized and excited, because my instinct was there was a new cohort of MPs who knew that there would be barriers to, for example, ripping up the planning system in this country. There would be vested interests everywhere. And we needed to organize the power of those newly elected MPs who otherwise wouldn't really be able to signal to the government, signal to the Prime Minister, go for it. Don't hold back. You'll get meetings where you'll be told it's too much. Here's a reason why not to do it. Here's another one. Do it. We're on your side. We've got your back. And that is the purpose of it. And we name and shame people, politicians who say, oh yeah, I really want growth. And then they say, but not that, NIMBYs, not here, not in my backyard.
Within your own party, you would name and shame?
Oh yeah, we have. I mean, if you check out the Twitter, they've taken examples from colleagues who have said something very different nationally and locally.
It's kind of rogue. Okay, I like it.
Yeah, no. But it's supposed to be rogue. It's new politics. It's fighting. It's showing what you're doing. It's having a clear principle and goal, and then not letting anyone stand in the way. And we really want the planning bill that the government's going to bring to be as ambitious as it possibly can. If there's ever a choice between, I'm worried about that, don't do it, do it.
Yeah.
And then the other group is the Red Wall group. And that is a slightly different group, although there's a big overlap in the growth agenda. But those are basically the reform-facing seats. If Reform don't win those seats in the industrial north, they will not be the largest party in Parliament, seats like mine. And if they do win them, then they might be the largest party in Parliament, and they could even form a government. So that is the heart of the fight in British politics at the moment, is the industrial north. And that was set up because, our Prime Minister represents a London constituency. Several members of our cabinet represent London constituencies. And centre-left parties all over the world are basically having to ask themselves the question, are we for university-educated, predominantly urban and suburban people, or are we for the working class? Because there are differences in attitudes, values, and interests between those things. And my test always is, are you prepared to lose votes in London, in Manchester Central, or if the Democrats, when I was living in the US, are you prepared to lose votes in Boston, New York, San Francisco, Houston, even, and gain them in order to gain them in more rural areas, in blue collar working class areas? Because you will have to do things where there are trade-offs. And often you'll have people who represent those more university educated urban areas who will say, yeah, I'm on the side of working class people, or often it's in the language of poverty. But when you point out what those people actually think and feel and want and say, when you listen to them, they're a bit uncomfortable with it. That is the existential question that centre-left parties have to ask themselves. In some ways, it's do they actually like working class people or not? And I spend most of my political life in the constituency talking to people who are white working class people, and what they think is so much more nuanced, surprising, and not what sometimes centre-left political establishments say that they think.
Is that the most important? Is that the most important problem to attack? Support for the most working class people in the country?
I think that in the sort of 80s and 90s, a view was reached. So, there are all these sociological debates about the end of the working class and so on. And basically what people argued was, now really you have the aspirational middle class. That's the important kind of political force. And this was true of the New Democrats. It was true of New Labour. And maybe that was true then. I don't know. But I certainly don't think it's true now. And I'm a bit skeptical about it as an argument then. I think the working class I know best, the English working class, are a real force in our politics at the moment. They are driving what's happening politically in this country. And basically, what defines, people often say, well, what is the working class now anyway? To me, it's really obvious. It's one, people who've experienced stagnation in their economic circumstances for, as you say, more than 14 years, 15, 20 odd years. Economic ceaseless and relentless economic insecurity. That's the experience. And then two, people who quite self-consciously blame the establishment for that experience. They blame people like me. And when you understand what's been going on and why, and the more you think about it, the more you think we're sort of partly right about that fact.
Why do you think it's happened, though? This economic stagnation. And I'll give you an interesting data point. I'm not sure if you listened to my interview recently, but usually my son's here. He's the live producer, and he occasionally chips in. And it's really interesting because we're obviously different generations, got different points. But I'm sorry to bore anyone who's heard this before, but he wants to buy a house at the moment, and I refuse to buy it for him. I've said I will lend him a deposit, but he has to pay me back. He has to be able to stand on his own 2 feet and do it. He's at the point now we can just about afford a house. And we were driving down to London the other week, and he said, "Oh, Dad, a house where you first bought your first house is now $350,000." And I was like, "No, it's not. My first house I bought it when he was just before he was born. So about a year before he was born. So about 21, 22 years ago. It was £100,000 exactly. My dad lent me $5,000 for the deposit, $5,000 to furnish it. And it's on the outskirts of Bedford. It's not in the best economic area, but it's fine. It was a great place to start. And I was like, there's no way a house there is $350,000. Shut up. You're fucking being an idiot. Anyway, we get up Rightmove and he was right. And so essentially we've had 250, 300% inflation in that area. So we ran the numbers. That's house inflation. CPI over the same period is about 80%. Average wages are up 40%, and nurses' wages are up 27%. Yeah. And so as soon as you see that, you realize everyone's being squeezed out. Me as an asset holder benefits from inflation. But the working class, the nurses, whoever, are being squeezed out of owning homes, being able to afford their bills. I mean, I also made a documentary once with Kurt here in Harlow, and we went to a food bank, and there was a nurse there. We spoke to her. She was very embarrassed. She just said, my wages do not allow me to pay my bills and feed myself. So somehow we have widened the wealth gap, and we've squeezed out really important people to our society from being able to afford homes. What do you know why that's happened? Do you have a thesis? Because I do.
Well, I'm interested to hear it. So I was going to say that there are basically two things, two drivers. I mean, why those drivers have happened is we should talk about, and I'd be interested to hear your theory. But one is basically property. If you take property out in this country, the whole economic picture looks completely different. And it's generationally outrageous, that. So one is property. The other one, though, that is particularly important for areas like mine is that all over Western democracies right now, this has been a massive problem for American democracy and particularly the Democrats for the last sort of 25 years. There were 4 pit mines in my constituency. I've spoken to hundreds of miners, and they will always say, I would never have wished that job on my grandkids, and I'm so glad they don't have to do it. But they will also always say, I did feel like my work was connected to the sort of prosperity and kind of story of this country. Like it was powering the Second World War, like it was powering the industry. It was a part of what we were doing as a country, what I was doing in the pits. Now, the economies of those areas, slightly different than pit towns in my constituency. One of them, for example, has got a McDonald's, a Burger King, an Aldi, basically retail stuff. Another one's got a logistics warehouse. And then there is 1 or 2 kind of light processing factories that actually don't have many jobs in them. So the employment has completely changed. And we effectively now live in economies where growth is city-led, it's high productivity, and therefore doesn't create that many jobs. And therefore, if you're a working class human being, what you're doing more likely is construction, bricklaying, plumbing, electricians. That's the largest private employer in my constituency. Public sector work, or you are doing service sector work like McDonald's, for example. It is the connection between those forms of work and your own sense of self-worth, your own status, your own role in society and place is completely different. You don't get it.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
I watched a trailer for a film coming out this morning called On Falling. I think it might even be the same director as Daniel Blake. Falling. I'll show you it later. It's worth watching. And it basically shows a lady working in, it looks like an Amazon distribution place. And it's kind of showing her lifestyle and the fact that she basically has no life outside of work. In her spare time, she does her washing. And there's a moment where she's maybe just a little bit sad at work. A guy comes around and says, your productivity has slowed down. And it's truly depressing. I think that's the picture you're painting. Bedford's the same. We have one of the largest Amazon distribution centers on the edge of Bedford and all these other logistics. And were you with me when we drove up there? Yeah. This thing was huge. And it was like a cage getting in there. And I was like, this is depressing.
Yeah.
And that sense of purpose, it's going to cut across in our AI discussion, but that sense of purpose, sense of meaning, I think, has gone.
Exactly. And that, I think AI is, people often talk about the jobs impact of AI in 2, 5, 10, 15 years down the track. In a way, it's already here.
Yeah.
Because that economic shift, it's not like large language models that we're talking about, but the use of data-driven technologies to automate processes, to enhance productivity, to displace parts of jobs, software, IT, etc. That is what is going on here. It's already happening. And the big existential economic question that it poses, connection between the economic problem and sort of culture in a way, is what's my life for? What's my purpose? What am I doing here?
I think for many it's become serfdom.
Yeah. And that is, democracy will not work unless we fix that problem.
Yeah, and I don't know how it can be fixed, but let me tell you what I think has happened. And this has come in part from spending, I don't know if you know, but previous to this show, we've made, say, 100 shows now. We made 860 about Bitcoin. We traveled the world, and because of that, I spoke to a lot of economists, a lot of politicians as well, but through that lens. What I think became quite obvious to me, I'm assuming you've read Ray Dalio's Economic Cycles, And if you haven't, you should get. And he's got a really good book that's just come out.
I'm an obsessive note taker, so I'm going to take notes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you. He's just got a book that's come out called "How Nations Go Broke." But he talks about the short-term and long-term economic cycle. So there's these short-term cycles, boom, bust, and then the long-term economic cycle. But I think what I've recognized is that the political cycle and the economic cycle don't match. And it was happening before 2008, but after 2008, I think governments got very comfortable with the idea of QE, with taking the drug rather than going cold turkey, and so it became easier to push for QE rather than saying, look, we're about to go into a recessionary period, we need to correct. And in doing that, what we've done is we've stored up the problems. And then if you start to look at what happened with interest rates, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to get 5, 6, 7% interest in the bank. When you're getting 0% interest or 0.1% interest, but inflation's happening, it's how do you save for your future? Well, what are the assets? Property became the asset.
Yeah.
So in destroying the money, we made property the asset, and then we didn't build enough houses, and in doing so, we've created that wealth gap, and people ended up owning 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 properties. And in doing so, it's just made it unaffordable. There's obviously loads of other things going in there, but this is, again, I go on about Bitcoin a lot because it highlights how broken money is and how easy it is for the government or central banks who are meant to be independent, but we know they're not, that they can solve short-term problems but build up long-term problems. And that's one of the problems that Rachel Reeves is facing is this huge debt we have now, which is over 100% of GDP. I mean, the US debt, 37 trillion now, is never going to be paid off.
Yeah. And
it's very obvious that we've seen the Cantillon effect at play. And so that to me, and I don't know how, well, it's not that I don't know how to solve that problem. There's more intelligent people who can solve that problem. But I think that's one of the biggest problems we face now, the liabilities of the country and then the unfunded long-term liabilities.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of rocking like a rabbi here, but I totally agree with that. And I can say that, by the way, because I'm Jewish. I need to footnote my wife here, who works on she's an academic and she works on central bank independence. And she's interestingly got a lot of libertarian friends. She's on the left. She's to the left of me. She always tells me I'm a sellout. But there's a weird connection between the debates that she's part of about macroeconomics and central banks and the libertarian right in the US. She always got loads of money when we were doing our PhDs from these like libertarian funders. Like, how do I get to them? And so we've talked about this a lot. In fact, we met when we were doing our PhDs. I was working on central banking and she was working on like data stuff, and then we sort of switched topics. Probably TMI about our marriage, but and before that, I was working as a research assistant for Helen Thompson, who has written a lot about QE and the sort of unintended ills that it's caused. So I actually think that here's a slightly counterintuitive part of what we need to do about this problem, like how we solve it. Part of how politicians told themselves they could fix the disjunct between short-term political cycles and what's in our long-term economic interest was independence. So they created all these things like the Office for Budget Responsibility, like central bank independence, that were kind of institutional artifices, basically. And then they talked a lot about them, and they said, oh, the OBRs scored me that, and the central bank does this, and the central bank has the whole display of the central bank governor coming to report to the legislature and update it on how it's achieving its mandate. But they don't really work.
No.
They just don't work.
It doesn't work.
The way that the OBR is working now with government is, as widely reported, bizarre. And the sort of myth that, QE busted the myth that the tools central banks had were narrow and apolitical. Obviously not. A central bank is buying a whole range of different assets. Like, for obvious starters, which financial assets you buy is a hugely political thing. And obviously, most of the public, my voters, don't have time to read about, different types of bonds and whether it's corporate debt or sovereign debt and all the rest of it. But it busted the myth that what central banks do was use a narrow range of tools to achieve a very specific target. And we've never really wrestled with what that means. And I really do think we are in an age now politically where we need to start talking about this kind of stuff in a big way, because again, my voters don't think about central bank independence, but they do kind of know that there's something about the big macroeconomic system that is not structured in their interest and which is beyond their power to control. And so they vote for people like me. They watch me go down there and say, sorry, central banks decided that we're not buying corporate bonds, we're buying sovereign bonds or whatever. And they think, well, what's the point in voting for you then? What's the point in you? If you can't really do anything, you don't really have any power to choose these things. Or you say you don't, because of course the truth is in British politics, Parliament can do pretty much whatever it wants. But you say you don't, what's the point in you? What's the point in voting?
I had Liz Truss there a few months ago, and I asked her, do we actually need a central bank?
What did she say?
She said it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
The idea that you would have returned to the free banking era, in that you would have a free market for money. It would be a radical experiment. I'm not sure a country like us could cope with it. But then I pushed back and said, well, this is exactly what I and my friends and colleagues have done with Bitcoin, is that they have access to a free money, a version that isn't controlled by government, that is only controlled by consensus.
Yeah, that is for one, sorry to jump in, but that is one area where the history of states over the last 5 centuries, they do 2 things. They fight and raise armies, and they tax.
Yeah.
And they have control over money. That is basically what a state is. And I don't think states are going anywhere. And I think that states will eat Bitcoin before Bitcoin changes what a state does, basically.
Possibly, probably.
And I think that, the important thing...
It was already happening, actually, because we know certain states are accumulating Bitcoin.
And they're starting to think about it. And I didn't know about Treasury holding Bitcoin as a deposit, by the way, which is interesting. Yep. What I think, though, about part of my problem with the way someone like Liz Truss approaches this sort of thing, and some of the kind of deep state language for it, is that jobs of people like us is not to go, it's an outrageous conspiracy. It's so politicians built these things. Politicians literally built, as you know, the Bank of England and the structure of it. That was a Labour government. The Fed is built through a series of legislative acts by Congress over a century and a half. So it's not good enough for us just to say, smash it all up, it's not working, it's all a conspiracy. That is nonsense. What do you actually want to do about central banks and the future of central banking? What do you actually want to do about the fact that, our international financial system was built for an age of oil? The basic energy underpinnings are going to shift towards electricity. That's going to have all kinds of different implications for finance and how we trade across the world. Britain has to show up at that table having thought about what the world order should look like and how we should be part of it. It's no good saying, we're not commentators, politicians. It's no good saying it's all wrong and it's not working. That, is irresponsible and lame. And I think people have got to stand up and start thinking seriously about, okay, we might agree that there are these big, unaccountable institutions that do not work in the interests of the vast majority of the people in this country. But then the question is, great, we agree on that. That's the start of where the conversation gets interesting, not the end of it.
Growth could be a silver bullet. I think growth solves a lot of things, but we don't really have growth right now. And I fear a contraction. I worry for my hometown. I worry for the high street. I'd be interested, because of your Labour growth group, what your views on what would drive growth. Because I've had economists here, and they all sing from the same kind of hymn sheet of what would drive growth. But are you aware of how difficult it is on the high streets at the moment? I assume you do, because you're from where you are. But what would you say are the problems? What would you say? Why would you say these kind of middle class run businesses are struggling so much, and so many are closing down? And what do you think would be required to fix it?
Yeah, high street. I'm so aware of high streets. It comes up all the time in my coffee mornings. The one town, Hindley, in my constituency, another one that's doing better, actually, Ashton. It's like vape shop, hairdresser, vape shop, hairdresser.
Charity, betting shop.
Yeah, exactly. A charity shop, maybe a pub if you're lucky. And how on earth are you supposed to feel? You come back from your Amazon warehouse job, you walk down your high street on a Monday morning, there's smashed glass all the way along it. There's probably a really irritating dirt bike going with a 12-year-old with a mask on.
Yeah.
And then you walk,
alcoholics.
Exactly, who are just, knocking around. And then you walk past and there's a vape shop with one bloke sitting in it who's doing nothing. and it looks like it's barely been touched for, how are you supposed to feel like you love this country and your, government cares about you and your community is respected and all the rest of it? High streets are at the heart. We have to think in a much more place-based way about everything government does, in my opinion. And actually, there's more that my government could do about this. We are doing things like, I will come back directly to your question, but it is part of the answer, I think. We are shifting the entire structure of the NHS away from hospitals into neighbourhood health centres. Mm-hmm. Where are those neighbourhood health centres going to go? They should be on high street.
So glad you said that. Where was it? Is it Bradford? Or there's some place up north, and they've got a building called the Glassworks, and they've moved outpatient care into the town centre, and that is driving a trade into the town.
Exactly.
We've got an old Debenhams in Bedford that's closed down, 3 stories. I would love to take it over. I would love to put retail on the first floor, hospital outpatients on the second floor, shared workspace on the third floor. Because there's 2 problems. There's the challenge of running the business themselves, bureaucracy, taxation, but there's also the problem of less people coming in because they feel unsafe, less reason to come in, and less money in their pocket. Yeah. These are all the problems.
Yeah. And you've got to fix that by, if you put a health centre in there, the police have to make sure that it's, these things all kind of come as a package, I think. But also there's other things like family hubs. We've just poured masses of money into new family hubs, a bit like Sure Start centres. Where should they be? They should either be attached to schools or they should be in town centres. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine this cluster of 2 or 3 different types of place-based things that we are already doing, we just don't talk about in the context of high streets, that sits alongside. I think we should look at some quite radical things like slashing business rates to 0 for a tiny area. Now, I must say, that is not government policy.
I know.
But things like that, and be really creative about it.
Do you know about the stupidity of the size of the property affects the business rates in that under a certain threshold, there's 0. So my friend's got they've got a women's fashion shop in Bedford. They reduced the size of their store so they could get under the threshold, so they had 0 business rates, but they had a bigger store. And the benefit to the town and them is a bigger store, but the economic benefit incentive was to reduce the size, and it just didn't make any sense. Yeah, I mean, I think every town centre should be an economic zone of interest with 0 business rates, and I know the problems that causes, but I just think it's long-term thinking rather than short-term.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of the problems with it as an idea is that, when I've spoken to the police, for example, about some of the vape shops that just look illicit to me, and I realise, I don't know anything, and actually Greater Manchester Police have got an operation to look into the business models behind some of them. When they are legitimate and they pay their business rates, but, the local butcher can't, that is really hard to do anything about until you start doing a France and saying, nope, you can't have that because it's ugly, which, Britain, we've never really done that in Britain. It's really hard to, if it's a legal business and they're paying their business rates, including if you knock them down to 0, you've still got a level playing field that's just lower. And I think we need to think about, do we care enough about supporting some of these businesses that you're actually targeting lower business rates at local ownership, at what they actually do and things like that.
More autonomy to the town would help, because that could help restore a civic pride. I think that I've got another book recommendation for you. Jane Jacobs wrote a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and it's very Hayekian in its thesis, in that what central planners can't do is understand spontaneous creation. All the millions of interactions that created a town. When you try and centrally plan, you essentially undo that. And I say that in a response to one of your points, where you said this is what government needs to do this. I think there's a strong argument that government should do less as well, and just give the entrepreneurs, the bakers, the builders, the opportunity to create businesses with as little red tape as possible, with as little taxation as possible, and bring safety back to when you bring the safety back.
Yeah,
because we've got this I can see the problems very clearly. We have people falling off the economic ladder and falling into addiction, but they're put into the HMOs in the town centre that cause the antisocial behaviour, which causes the mums and the mums with their kids not to come into the town because they feel unsafe. And then you throw in the taxation and the lack of money because of cost of living. It's very obvious to see the slide. And I just think perhaps one of the things to do is for government to just do less.
Yeah. I agree with some of that, but not all of it. So just to take a step back really far, one specific thing to say though, or not though, is I think it would be really interesting for the centre of government to think about how would you reorganise part of the centre of government so it's all about place. You've literally got at the centre of government, a map of the UK, and you can double click on Bedford or Hindley in my constituency, and you know that Bedford needs an upgrade to its rail station, that flyover that was built, I'm making this up because I don't know Bedford, but taken down even though it's been laid empty for ages. It needs new benches on it, a list of 10 things, and a map of the area where you've got an economic, whatever you want to call it, focus zone or low taxation zone or business support zone or something. And then reorganize everything that you're doing in health and education and so on. There are vast sums of money that these departments spend that do in fact go into these towns and sometimes the town centres, but they're not remotely coordinated or thought of in terms of place, even though human experience is all about place. It's all about, what is it? It's your family, it's your community, it's your country. That's what you experience. So I do think there's a lot, government is not the answer, but government's partly sometimes the problem because it isn't structured in a way that actually matches the experience of what it's doing. And that makes the communication about what it's doing to people on the ground much harder. They think it all looks like a mess.
Yeah.
The one, to go back to zooming out, this is, I'm a bit of a Hayek nerd too.
Okay.
I always think Hayek's much subtler than people, he's not straightforwardly a libertarian thinker at all in my view. And also as he got older, he sort of mellowed in interesting ways, as old people tend to do.
And he said there is a role for supporting the most vulnerable in society, those who've been less fortunate.
But this is where, so let's pick that up, because I think if Hayek knew about the actual society we lived in, he would think, well, we're going to have to make some really hard. So we are an aging society.
Yep.
We have rates of mental health and autism and ADHD going through the roof, which has completely transformed the SEND system in schools and the welfare system, as you know. And that has in turn completely changed what councils do because of their statutory obligations, as you said. And our working age population is declining. Our birth rate is going through the floor. And we don't want mass legal migration. Public have made that very clear. Mm-hmm. If you take that set of propositions and also to sort of map off the whole bigger context, and this is really important, and I don't think anyone's seriously thinking about how we do it yet. If we're serious about 5% of GDP on defence by 2035, that is a complete radical change in what the state does. We are going to have a serious conversation about what the state doesn't do.
Yes. In
big ways. And helping the vulnerable, even if your principle was the only things the state should do is help the vulnerable, where is it not going to do what it's currently going to do? Because those systems, the SEND system, the welfare system, public healthcare, and then public education, those and defence are kind of basically what the state does. I don't know what percentage of state spend that is, but it's a lot. And we can't afford to do that in 25 years based on the current working age population projections.
Well, it's either massive growth or massive cuts. One of the or a combination of the two. This walking a fine line of trying to keep the electorate happy whilst trying to balance the books as best you can through taxation and borrowing isn't working. It's slow decline.
And growth, by the way, even, if you're going to get growth up to 5% or something, the level of growth that you would need to address the basic demographic and therefore taxation spending problem that the state's going to have in 20 years, I don't think that's ever going to match up. And you shouldn't let politicians, if you let them tell you that growth is the answer, they'll tell you that growth is the answer. But all the facts
growth will help.
No, I'm not anti-growth. Obviously, growth's vital, but growth is it's a necessary but not sufficient answer.
Yeah, but there needs to be a reason to invest. I've got money on the sidelines ready to invest. I would open 3-4 new businesses in my town centre. I know there isn't the economy to support that at the moment because of the death of this town centre. I wrote a manifesto for my town centre. I'll send it to you. You should read it.
Just definitely run for mayor. Who's the mayor right now?
Tom Wotton, Conservative. I was previously critical of him, but actually I spent time with him and I've realised, I've spent some time with him recently. He told me 2 of his challenges. One of them is social housing is a massive challenge. He said every time there's a new housing project, there's a 30% social housing, they lose money. It costs them more money and they don't have the money. He also said that the business rates rebalancing is a real problem. And they've got a smaller and smaller budget going to to more and more required items, especially the mandated items. I did a Freedom of Information Act request on emergency housing. I think it's up 2.5x in 3 years.
It's shocking.
Yeah, and so I then I start to think, well, what is it? Does the UK essentially need to have AMLA? Do we need some quite strong libertarian principles? Do we have to look at some of our sacred ideas like the NHS and say, because somehow we have to not only live within our means, we have to put more money in the pockets of people. For me, if you put more money in the pockets of the people locally, they're going to spend locally. If you make the town safe, they're going to go into the town centre. But you've got to, I genuinely feel, this might sound narcissistic, but I genuinely feel if I was able to be the mayor of Bedford and was able to have autonomy and the government created like a project, I could create a template, but it would have to do some quite savage things.
And I think, so I sort of partially agree with that. But I think it's harder than I've got a question back to you, because I don't think it's libertarian to say that in 20 years from now, unless something radically changes, the state cannot afford to do all the things it does right now. That's just a fact. I think that. Would not describe myself as a libertarian. Although, slight tangent, but freedom and control are probably my guiding values as much as anything else.
Control. What do you mean by control?
I
understand freedom.
I think that the way you get freedom in a modern complex economy is that you have to be able to have collective control over your kind of destiny in a way, over the fate of your country. And that is basically what the state is for. Number one, you need an army because you need to be able to defend your country and your borders. You need borders that you can control and police and so on. And that's why the boats thing is so existential. You need police internally so you have social order. And then you build things on top of that that are expressions of things that you collectively as society want to be able to do because you think it's good. And that control is such an important, it's an underrated part of what democracy is. It's the capacity to elect people who control the sort of shared path of your country.
Sounds like you're talking mainly about security there, which is a good thing, by the way. So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com.
It is, but the NHS is a form of that as well. And this is, so to go back to link that control point to what you were saying about, if only the state could get out of my way and allow me to do the things I already want to do, Bedford Town Centre would be transformed. For the state to, for instance, put business rates to zero in town centres in 20 years' time, we've got to say, we're not going to do public education anymore, for example. I'm not arguing for these. We're not going to do public healthcare anymore. And by the way, even if you do an insurance-based system, it still costs the state not that much less than what it costs the state to do the NHS. In terms of percentage of GDP spend, there's not a wild variation between France, Germany, and so on. In fact, the US is the outlier. But in some way, we're not just going to have an insurance-based system, but we're going to somehow construct that system so it costs the state less, which would be basically new. Or we're just going to get rid of the welfare state in some massive form. Those are the sorts of scale, or we're just going to ditch the army, screw 5%, we're going to go down to 0.5% and just hope that no one invades us. That is the scale of things that we would have to think about in that kind of scenario.
What? But maybe we do.
Well, I'm not arguing that we don't. I'm just saying that the state getting out the way is then going to require, so suppose we just get rid of public healthcare in Bedford, you're then going to have higher death rates, people who can't work because they're ill, your fit, healthy workforce. The reason why we had the NHS was because we needed a fit army and a fit workforce. Those are the reasons. It was essentially an instrumental thing originally, as you know. Beveridge Report and then the Boer War afterwards, before it, was all about, oh my God, we need to raise an army and we can't because people have got no teeth, they've got broken legs, they've got rickets and so on. So if you get rid of it, that's the sort of consequence you've got to reckon with. And that's not good for growth either.
No, I think of it in a different way. So you've got a family, you're married. You get paid, you have a budget. You have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay for your car, for whatever you need for your kids. You can't do everything you want. And some of those things are things you maybe want to do for your kids that are really important and you can't. And maybe for your wife and you can't. You have to keep to a budget. And I think government should be very similar. Because if there was no QE to put on, then government would have to stick to a budget or have to find a way of raising money. They couldn't raise taxes too high because they'd be voted out. So they would have to have some form of discipline. And I think there just has to be a form of discipline. Here is the budget.
I agree with that.
Yeah. And so it's...
And of course there is, by the way, the bond markets in this country are a very powerful thing, as we all know.
And they're telling us an important, giving us an important message at the moment. But I think there just needs to be stronger discipline around these things. And I think it's a challenge. I think I accept the challenge, but I also accept the consequences of, we can't always default to, but what if we don't do this for that person? What if we don't provide that for that person? What if we don't provide a house for this person? Because as a country, our trajectory is bankruptcy.
No, I agree with you. It's not serious leadership to just say, well, that would be bad because this would happen.
Yeah.
But I think the devil all lies in, well, which is it? Let's reason about and talk about the trade-offs between radically changing the public healthcare system, which is one of the things that I really don't think we should do because of the history of why it was created is so important for growth and for the health and security of the nation. I think it's not serious just to say, well, we need to do something less. You have to say what. In politics, the hardest question is always being specific about what, because that's where people don't like it. Everybody in principle would say, yes, the state should get smaller. Okay, well, you're not going to get your food stamps. Okay, you're going to take, your son-in-law off PIP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then people go, oh, don't do that, do something else. Or we're going to get rid of the triple lock, et cetera, et cetera. And
good idea.
Yeah. Tell my gran. And I just think we are miles away at the moment from having that conversation. I agree that we need to. And the family analogy is quite instructive because at the moment, what is basically happening with the demographics of our country and the implications of that for what the state does is we're losing children somehow, and our partner has just divorced us and is not going to contribute to the family pot anymore. And so, other way around. We're having loads of children, so there are more dependents, and we don't have any more earners. We've lost a partner. And that is like getting worse and worse and worse somehow. And then we're about to lose our own job, or we're about to cut our income in half. And then we're going to have another kid at the same time, and on it goes. And so in 25 years, given current birth rates, given clear stated preferences about migration and the average age of our population, we're going to have 25 kids. We're going to be on the dole, essentially. And what we're going to do.
All right, let's make this challenge harder. The last show we released was with Max Winger from Control AI, where he came in to give me the most doomer scenario of AI, that in the next 3 to 5 years, we might reach superintelligence, and there's a good chance it might kill us all. That's not the thing I want to talk to you about. We might get into that. But from that, I've been down the AI rabbit hole this week. I must have listened to 10 podcasts this week. And I keep focusing on the labor market. And what these podcasts have told me is something I've been instinctively feeling, but haven't been able to put my finger on. In that, I've met a lot of young people. I have a little fund in Bedford where I give money out to young people who do sports or business. And I've met a bunch of young people who said they've been to uni and they cannot get a job. And then I listened to this podcast and it said, because the majority of graduate jobs are now being outsourced to AI. So if you were a consultancy and you, took on 5,000 grads, you might only need 3,000 now because the person you're going to work for is outsourcing a bunch of the research and basic work to AI agents. And it was a real kind of like aha moment in that, because I have to think about my daughter. She's 15. If she does go to university in 3 years, what should she study? What will be useful in 5 years in the world of superintelligence? And it really hit me that the way we're going to be essentially wiping out jobs is from the bottom up. And we've kind of done that with robotics. In the supermarkets, we now serve ourselves rather than have somebody serve us. That's wiped out a lot of the jobs near the bottom. But we're now doing that within consultancies, within design agencies, within advertising, in every area. And that to me that's a huge problem, because we've already got an apathetic youth who feel like they can't get on the housing ladder, there's no opportunities. And now, what are the jobs available for them? And I know you've written a book on AI. How do you think about this?
What's that acronym that my teenage, I guess she's not teenage anymore, BFD, big fucking deal? That's what I think about it. I think it's fundamental in so many different ways. So thing number one, I think, my constituency, largest private form of employment is the trades. Plumbers, electricians, bricklayers. When you drive, at 7, 8 p.m. on a Friday night, when I'm driving back to my house, there's vans outside, tons of houses with, small businesses, either self-employed or often small businesses. Their jobs are looking good.
Yeah, by the way, sorry to interrupt. No. I just watched an interview with the godfather of AI on Stephen Bartlett. Oh, yeah. He said, what would you tell your kids? He said, become a plumber.
Exactly. So that's partly where I'm going.
Yeah.
We've got to a world where mass education is about rote learning, about knowledge and so on, which by the way, I'm not of the view at all that we should de-emphasize that. I think the questions, you're always going to have to ask AI questions in different ways. And the quality of the questions you ask is very, very important. And it requires knowledge as well as, critical thinking and creativity and things like that. But we've got to a world where that kind of mass education, the culmination is to go to university. You go to university, you get your 2-1 or your first class degree and you've done well and you'll be fine. And I think we need to, in some ways, radically shift back to a more physical, partially understanding of training, skills, education and work in a massive way. And I have said this to colleagues in Parliament. I want technical education, skills, technical colleges. We've got a fantastic one in Wigan and Leigh, to become a much bigger part, not just of the sort of economic program or devolution agenda of this government, but of the story of what it's trying to do, and how it's trying to rebalance our economy, and also to that thing we were talking about earlier, sense of status and purpose and so on. These people are building our country. They're building the houses we live in. They're building the rail we travel on. They're building the roads we drive on. And thank God for them, because otherwise we'd not be able to do any of that. But we don't really sort of celebrate that work in the same way. And I think we should, and we should celebrate the educational pathway to it. So I think we need a massive repivoting away from university towards technical education in a big way. And I just to sort of paint this picture of you, I work very closely with the technical college in my constituency. Well, it's actually not in my constituency, but in the borough in my constituency. And Wigan and Leigh College, you go, for example, to the electrician part of it. They've got a heat pump alongside an old school plumber. They've got a wall that's plastered with wires. And you see, when I went in, there was probably 17 blokes, 4 women doing this stuff. And you think, wow, what a beautiful thing, frankly. And most people down here in London doing these sort of professional jobs probably don't even know that kind of place exists and who the kinds of people they are they're training. So I really think we as a government should talk about this a lot more. We should celebrate it a lot more, and we should invest in it a lot more. And I think that's a big part of our AI future.
Yeah. I'll give you one little anecdotal story as well. My daughter came home and said that they've banned the use of AI. And I said, absolutely ignore that. And so we did one of her pieces of coursework, and I got her to use AI. But I also got her to use the AI to disguise the fact that she'd used AI. But the reason I did it is because a lot of the people...
Cat's out of the bag now, by the way, if the teacher's listening.
Yeah, sorry about that. But the reason I did it is because consultancy that's gone from 5,000 grads to 3,000 grads to maybe 1,500 grads. The grad that comes in and says, oh, by the way, I've been using AI since I was 15. I use ChatGPT to help structure arguments and do my research and fact check. I've been using Midjourney to create graphics and templates. I'm like, oh, you're ready.
Right.
You're the one I need. And that made me have a kind of fundamental rethink about schooling itself. I had David Starkey here the other day, and we were talking. He gave me recommended two books to read. Origins of English Individualism and...
Oh, that's a great book.
It's a great book. And then Reflections on the Revolution of
France.
Yeah,
also a great book.
Okay, Truth, I couldn't understand because the language is so old.
It's weird. There are modern translations of it that turn it into,
So, well, I did it a different way. I plugged them into two different AIs. There's one called Google LLM, I think it is, where it turns it into a podcast where people debate the book, which is mind-blowing. And then I debated the books with ChatGPT, so I could just understand the arguments. And I kind of got to the point where I realized what he was doing. He was trying to make me understand that individualism is really important. But in that, what I realized is that in education, we do a lot of teach a lot about what happened. Henry VIII had 6 wives. But actually, should we be teaching about the revolution in France and why it failed? Should we be teaching like the parts of history that give you lessons to understand the person you should become and why you should be, like the critical thinking side? And I kind of realized that I'm doing that with my kids, but they're not doing that at school. And I wonder if school is no longer fit for purpose for where we're going.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that we're going to have to radically change what schools do. Definitely. I mean, so there's one thing that I do want to emphasize about the story with your daughter, because I was thinking about this related to my own kids. I think there's 2 separate reasons there's lots more than 2, but 2 different reasons that we have to distinguish when we're talking about educating our children and the future kids in our country. One is it's a functional thing. You know, we're educating you so that you can succeed in the labor market. And in that kind of situation, teaching kids how to use AI intelligently is extremely important. And we need to do it. And, you know, by the way, that goes for plumbers and electricians and so on too. There's lots of ways they'll be able, not to do the physical work. You know, apparently the robotics revolution is coming. Always happens slower than people say it's going to happen. But anyway, so that's one thing. You do it because it's going to help them thrive in the labor market. And that's why we educate kids. That's why we teach them maths. That's why we teach them, English literature, etc. But the other is about their own capacities and their own skills and their own virtues. And I was started off my education life as a bit of a philosophy nerd. And I'm a big believer in virtue ethics as a thing and talking about character and, what you are as a person. And one of the things that's going to happen in an AI world is that's going to matter even more than it did before. And we're going to have to get used to talking and thinking about that kind of way of reasoning again, whereas we've become entirely driven by instrumental, almost economic logic in sort of utilitarian logic in education. And one of the reasons why you learn knowledge is so that you can ask better questions. When you learn new knowledge, you can then connect your knowledge to the other bits of knowledge that you've got. And so I think we're going to have to do coursework where you encourage kids to use AI and using it well as part of the skill that they are developing and will help them in the labor market. And then you're going to have to say, come into an exam room, sit down for 3 hours with a pen and paper and write and answer this question.
Yes.
And we're not testing there whether you're going to survive well in a labor market. We're testing your own brain and your own capacities. And we've got to cleanly distinguish the functions of those 2 things a bit better. And we don't do that at the moment.
Going down the AI rabbit hole for your book, how far did you go down the doom? AI is going to kill us all.
So the big point of my work academically was, and I was working and
it was democracy, right?
It was democracy, and to that control point, it was how do we exert our own will over this as a country and even as people, versus talking about it constantly as if it's a thing that's happening that we have to sort of respond to in real time. And of course, it's both, but we always talk about how many jobs is AI going to destroy, as if it's a sort of inexorable fact of nature. And then we'll just ride along the side and deal with the consequences. At all times in history, during massive changes, human agency is the thing that you end up talking about and thinking about in politics. And the point of the book was to say, how do we actually exert that? Like how? It was a how question. And that, I was working at the same time in Facebook's responsible AI team for not all, but most of the period I was writing that book. So I was doing it in real time, which was important in the AI bit of the org rather than the sort of PR policy bit of the organization. And
that must have been a wild place to work.
It was completely wild is the right word. I didn't know anything about. I showed up I was still smoking roll-up cigarettes. I had a piercing, wearing skinny jeans, like very,
Was it Menlo Park? Is it Menlo?
Yeah, it was in Menlo Park. Yeah. I was there, not for the whole period I worked there, but for some of it. And by the way, you cannot have a roll-up cigarette in Menlo Park. That's just, no one does that.
Nobody smokes, really, do
No, it was weird. I remember going outside on the fire exit thinking, there's just no smoking area in Menlo Park. And, in the UK, what was I, in the sort of 5 years prior, that's where all the good conversations really happened, was in the smoking area, but not in Menlo Park.
Just you and your own.
Just me and my own thing, feeling like a bit scuzzy. And then all these fit people with protein shakes walk past and sort of look at you like you're a loser. Basically, I didn't want to get into the question of whether it's going to be doom and gloom or not, because everything that I was reading at that point, it was predictive. It was like, we're all commentators. Yeah. We're not. We're agents, and not least when I was working at this company where it was employing people who were agents. Everybody was designing things, what design questions you'd ask, what your objective function is, what algorithm you'd use to train your model on. All these were choices that people were making in real time. On the board of the wall next to the room that I was working in Menlo Park, was the top line meaningful social interactions metrics that the whole of Facebook's newsfeed is oriented to optimize. And you literally have a sort of tickers, and you could go in and click on what was happening in, Mongolia on MSI. And then people were tweaking algorithms to improve that objective function. So that was a choice. That's agency. And you might think that's the right choice. The wrong choice could be changed, whatever. But there, finally, you've got a question, right? You've got something we can do something about. And so for me, it was about looking at all the choices that were being made in that company in real time, and then thinking in a much bigger way about how we as a democracy can talk about in a sort of political way, because no one's made a politics out of this yet. No party's figured it out and say, let's talk about what we want to do here. Let's talk about what we want to achieve. Let's talk about it. And it's not just regulation. Sorry, this is a rant now, but
go on, do it.
States are made, and sort of where they came from is to pass laws where you can say you're banned from doing that. You can't do that. That's illegal. It's like guardrails. That's what law is in a way. AI is all about design. The point at which you exercise power is much earlier on and sooner on. You have to think before you sit down to design an algorithm. What's my data set? How am I building it? What's my objective function? Which algorithm am I going to use, etc. And you have to think about that at the start. And that's not really how law works. You say you can do whatever you want within these guardrails. And so we've got to think in a much more design way about tons of things we do. That includes business, where it's obviously a bit easier because you don't have to pass laws. And a big part of how businesses are already starting to think about AI is, well, how do we design our processes differently, as you know, because we're going to use AI. Same is true of the whole way that government and democracy works. We've got to think in a multidisciplinary, faster-paced, problem-solving design way, not in a, we're going to ban people from, standing around there at 9 p.m. at night. And that's, to me, a fascinating set of questions.
You did avoid the doomer part, though.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've had the kind of veil lifted on it. And my primary concern is there is a race between Elon, Zuckerberg, Sam Altman. They all want to be the first to create the superintelligence, which we haven't fully defined yet. But
exactly, what is it?
But they're racing to do it. The money they're spending is obscene. The advances are incredible, but I don't think we fully understand the consequences. And when each is pushed on their kind of odds of a doom scenario, they might say, "Well, 20%, 30%." I'm like, hold on a second, you're playing with something. So the guy put it to me, he said, with the Manhattan Project, there was the fear that once they detonated, this could create a chain reaction that would blow up the planet. And that was a 1 in 300,000 chance, they thought. And we've got people playing with that, what they think is a 20% chance. You don't need to answer now. I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes. I just want to say, is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to touch on in these last 10 minutes? Otherwise, I'll perceive
Let me
that.
check my notes about all the things.
Yeah,
I mean,
just want to make sure there's any particular. I haven't even referred to mine. I'll tell you what I do have as a question.
Yeah, go on. By the way, just very quickly,
Yeah.
I know you didn't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
but I just think that the definition stuff is really important.
Yes.
Because I think the advances in AI, in LLMs, for example, are huge and important, and we should talk about them. They have real impacts. Superintelligence, I think, is as much a story as anything else.
Fair.
And one of the big barriers in our world is between the physical and data. And actually, we're proving really slow at solving those barriers. Robotics is way behind the rapid use of data. And I just don't buy some of the, I think it's loose language that brutally is in the interests of some of these, celebrity tech barons. It's really helpful for Zuckerberg's story to be, look, I've just pinched that guy for 200 million from Sam. Come on, media, talk to me about that. That's great for the company and the corporate interest. Does that mean they're going to be 4 years away from superintelligence? No, I'm not convinced.
By the way, those pay packages.
I mean, it's wild.
It was explained to me, it's essentially like Premier League football now, Champions League football. You need the big talent and they're paying those kind of wages. Blew my mind. Okay, I've got a question for you. So, again, I don't know your age, but I'm going to guess mid-30s-ish. You've potentially, if you stick with it, a few decades still in politics. What's really important for you to be remembered? Like, what would be important for you in terms of a sense of achievement for you, and how would you want to be looked back on?
That is a great question. I've never been asked.
And well, maybe then you've not thought about it, but I wonder how thinking about it would change how you would act. Because, and let me throw it in at just a personal point. I think I would fail in politics because I can't toe the line. I'd be very honest, and I would get in a lot of trouble. So, I'd be very interested on how you think about it.
I really believe in teams, all good things in life, in my view. I've set up 2 organizations myself, built teams, grown them, raised money. Last one I ended up was about 40 people. When I started, it was 1. So I believe in teams a lot. And so for me, towing the line that's okay because it's partly about teams, and you care about you want the person to stand by. So I played a lot of rugby growing up. The person by your shoulder, you've got their back, and sometimes that means they drop the ball. Doesn't matter. You pick it up and you carry on. So the towing the line bit, I don't find that hard, especially if you can feedback in private. I think for me, and by the way, 20 years, it used to be the case that people could think that far ahead about their own careers because you could be certain about some seats staying your colour. That's not the world we live in anymore. My seat has been Labour since 1906. I had the 6th or 7th highest reform vote share in the country. And I think it's a good thing in a way because parties stopped taking them for granted. But it does mean that, long careers in politics are going to become fewer and farther between. And I think that is actually a problem because you get these pockets of safe seats where politicians are only thinking about their bases. And then the people in the middle never really get the chance to establish a long-term career. And they're actually the ones that are thinking about the kind of centre ground voter. Slight tangent, but it's important. I would like to be really remembered. If this were possible somehow, I think the way we govern this country is pretty broken. I think it needs to be radically changed through from the way that devolution currently operates all the way through to the institutions of economic governance in this country. And I would like to be part of and remembered for helping to rebuild it as part of a world order that's going to be rebuilt over the next 20, 30 years, and putting working class people in this country who have built this country and who, continue to power it at the heart of whatever the next system looks like. And if I can be remembered as a kind of designer almost of constitutional change, of economic system change, of geopolitical change, that would be, in terms of career, more important than that is my marriage is fine and my children do well. But assuming that those are true, as a kind of designer who changes systems that are obviously not working and who designs them in the interests of working class people, that would be pretty cool.
Well, look, I've really enjoyed this. I think we should have gone for another couple of hours, and you should come back anytime you want. I'd love to talk to you again. Give you a backhanded compliment. I found you a breath of fresh air compared to the front bench of the Labour Party, and I mean that in the kindest possible way. I didn't know what I was going to get, and I found myself agreeing with you on more than I disagree with. But
that
maybe
means I'm probably going to get a call being in trouble.
Yeah, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah. No, but like, I just found it kind of interesting. I think this was good. And I would like to do it again sometime with you. I think there's plenty more we could talk about. I'm a free vote. I'm a floating vote at the moment. I probably will never vote for Labour, but at the same time, I think directionally, I think you're more what people are looking for. So somebody's going to be open and honest, but understand that you're within a party and the constraints of a party. Good luck, Josh. Enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Would love to come back and pick up the superintelligence combo, among others. I'm a massive nerd about that. But yeah, no, I've really enjoyed the chat. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone for listening. We'll see you soon.